information and meaning. Just because information is being conveyed between a system and its environment doesn't tell us anything about its meaning, though. Shannon's formulation of information dealt with informational quantification and accuracy, but remained entirely mute on how to assess whether information was actually significant to an entity, whether it was important or of value to some system in some context. But that is precisely the sort of meaning that we are interested in here. According to Shannon, I could send you an email containing billions of completely random numbers, and so long as you accurately received what I sent, you had gained a good amount of information. Clearly, this is a very impoverished notion of information. It ignores the crucial question of what information is about, what it might be for, and thus its semantic significance. Recently, however, complexity theorists have been able to fill in what's missing from this incomplete account. Specifically, they have identified how to articulate meaning within information theoretical terms. If entities are defined as stable transmissions of information through time, then continued, accurate transmission has intrinsic significance to the entity that is so informed. Some information transmission has an existential import. Likewise, when the information identifying an entity requires energy from the environment with which it is coupled to be sustained, then information about the environment must not only be accurate but helpful. That is, it must convey information about the environment in a manner that can be of use to sustaining the information that defines the entity. These sorts of ideas can be framed in the language of information theory. Specifically, because systems exist in environments, the information between them is correlated. Information about the state of the system directly relates to the information about the state of its environment and vice versa. This coupling of information between system states and environmental states is called mutual information, since it entails a statistical correlation between the two. Now, as we have seen, maintaining information requires energy. For a system to resist entropy and maintain itself, it must acquire this needed energy from its environment. Information from the environment can be relevant to that end or not. Indeed, there can be all sorts of information conveyed in Shannon's sense. What determines its true relevance, however, is adjudicated by how the mutual information of the system-environment relationship directly influences the system's continued existence. That is, at the most fundamental level, mutual information can be meaningful to the extent it causally impacts the specific existential requirements of a thing in context by helping it resist entropic breakdown. Only when information contributes to the capacity of something to continue existing in the face of entropy does it acquire meaning to that thing. This is what information can be about. When it is, the information is called meaning. Complexity scientists Artemy, Kolchinsky, and Wolpert have been key to developing information theory in this way, allowing us to account for this sort of meaning and relevance mathematically. In a 2018 paper, they differentiate the specific kind of inherently meaningful information as true semantic information. Shannon information theory, they write, provides various measures of so-called syntactic information which reflect the amount of statistical correlation between systems. By contrast, the concept of semantic information refers to those correlations which carry significance or meaning for a given system. Kolchinsky and Wolpert thus assess meaning as arising out of the system-environment relation, and so offer a theory of semantic information that is based purely on the intrinsic dynamics of a system in a given environment. Information is meaningful for an entity to the degree that it assists in helping it resist entropy. As they put it, we define semantic information as the syntactic information that a physical system has about its environment, which is causally necessary for the system to maintain its own existence. At the most basic level, then, environmental information causally tied to a system's informational persistence is a special kind of information that we can call meaning. Meaningless information, by contrast, offers nothing to an entity's continuation. Expending energy attending only to meaningless information about the environment extracts a true cost from an entity, and is therefore existentially hazardous. If investments of energy into gaining information do not yield returns of energy commensurate with the expense, the entity risks entropic dissolution. Thus, Kolchinsky and Wolpert note, there is a connection between paying attention to the right information, as measured by semantic efficiency, and being thermodynamically efficient. Meaning, they say, increases a system's viability. By viability, though, they are not just referring to living systems. Kolchinsky and Wolpert's theory of semantic information is truly generalizable in that it applies not only to living beings but also any physical system, whether a rock, a hurricane, or a cell. All things face entropy. The viability of some entities is simply more sensitive to environmental conditions than others, but all are susceptible to annihilation. Meaning, it seems, has a truly expansive sense that can refer even to non-biological entities, a point we shall repeatedly return to. In sum, Kolchinsky and Wolpert's work, along with that of physicists like Carlo Rovelli, reveal that information can be useful or useless, relevant or irrelevant, about something important, or a harmful waste of time and energy. Information is relevant if it gives an entity causal power to maintain itself in its environment. Such information is then meaningful information, which emerges through the impinging of reality on agent behavior, which must adapt to its conditions to maintain its continued existence. Once we appreciate these fundamental dynamics about how systems relate to meaningful information in context, we can begin to understand the universal importance of learning. Semantic information theory lies at the heart of neuroscientist and science writer Bobby Azarian's integrated evolutionary synthesis, a key component of his ambitious unifying theory of reality, which sees the whole of cosmic evolution as one great learning process, unfolding across multiple levels of emergence. Linking theories like universal Darwinism, universal Bayesianism, evolutionary theory, and evolutionary epistemology into a single meta-theory, Azarian's integrated evolutionary synthesis identifies the processing of semantic information as the basis of knowledge creation across all scales of evolution. Essentially, it is the driving logic of how all things persist, diversify, and grow. As he puts it in his 2022 book, The Romance of Reality, How the Universe Organizes Itself to Create Life, Consciousness, and Cosmic Complexity, what is the foundation for a non-reductionist theory of everything? To understand the nature of life and the nature of reality, we must begin with what many scientists consider to be the law of all physical laws, the second law of thermodynamics, the natural tendency toward decay and disorder described by Boltzmann's statistical vision of the second law, which can be summed up as things fall apart. It gives any conceivable adaptive or sentient system an eternal existential challenge. Biologists call it survival, cyberneticists call it persistence, and physicists call it staying far from thermodynamic equilibrium. To stay far from equilibrium, in other words, to continue to exist, a system must be able to extract free energy from a noisy, fluctuating, ever-changing environment. This is no trivial task. In fact, it absolutely requires that life acquire information about the world it inhabits. This information has intrinsic meaning to a system because it is causally necessary for its continued existence. Due to its inherent meaningfulness, this kind of information has been called adaptive information. Because adaptive information reduces environmental uncertainty, or Shannon entropy, which is a technical term for ignorance, we also call it knowledge. As entities complexify, they become more adept at processing meaningful information from their environments. Expressed in concise terms, life's thermodynamic imperative necessitates knowledge accumulation. What Azarian calls knowledge here, I will call meaning, or meaningful knowledge when appropriate, following Kolchinsky, Wolpert, Rovelli, and others. That is the sort of information that has true relevance and significance for an entity, knowledge with causal power on the continued viability and flourishing of systems in contexts. And why exactly? Some basic philosophical reflection on this idea reveals it to be both tautologically simple yet existentially profound. Without meaning, an entity would cease to exist, such that there would be nothing to speak of, nothing to consider. There would be no information about it at all, nothing to distinguish it, nothing to define it. If meaning is information that is relevant to the robust continuance of an entity, then the very fact that anything exists entails the existence of meaning. For a thing to be entails that it has meaning. From the very logic of semantic information, such as Kolchinsky and Wolpert articulate, it is clear that entities more effective at attending to meaningful information will be more viable and thus more evolutionarily successful. There is then a natural evolutionary incentive for entities to acquire increasing information about themselves and their environment in furtherance of this process. More information processing capacity, though, requires entities that are themselves more informationally rich. As this feedback cycle unfolds, entities complexify, which both demands and occasions access to still more energy from the environment. And with energy increasingly needed to sustain such high informational order in the face of entropy, the energy-information cycle perpetuates itself. When we appreciate that 1. Entities exist, i.e. they faithfully convey their informational identity into future states, through correlation with the information of environmental contexts, i.e. mutual information, and 2. this correlation is the basis of meaning, and 3. entities are complexifying via this informational exchange, then we are led to an interesting conclusion, namely that meaning itself must be complexifying. Meaning and complexification.